Hello, everyone. I'm Vincent. I'm one of the co-organizers. Man, I've done this intro so many times. I'm a contractor. I usually don't tell people how I got into it because it's just such a crazy, weird story. But if you want to talk about contracting, I talk about it till the cows come home. I second what Jonas just talked about. I had to learn soft skills to pretty much keep my job. I was pretty good at coding. But at the same time, talking with people, I was good at talking to people like this and people I, kind of have shared common interests with. But the hardest part was always just talking with new clients and new people and changing teams every 6 months to a year. So really second the soft skills approach to everything, just in general. So one thing I love about contracting is I get to work on new projects all the time. That's why I stay doing it. And one of the things I've been working on for the past 3 to 6 months is with an organization called OMES. And one of the things that we are doing at OMES is we're building an entire design system there. And specifically in this talk, we're going to do, it's all in Figma, but these all translate to across all the different design systems that are out there. So all the Adobe platforms, all the freeware versions, and a multitude, of course, that I'm not even going to mention. So for context, this one's going to be in Figma. Real quick, OMES is think of them as contractors within the state. So they are a newer organization, and what they're designed to do is modernize Oklahoma. I didn't know this whenever I started, but there's hundreds of agencies out there that are helping in a multitude of different ways. Not just the big ones that people know of, like to file your taxes or to get a permits or things like that, but there are smaller organizations that either need a brand new site or their site is quite literally from the 90s or the early 2000s. And OMES is bringing them all into newer platforms and newer tools, centralizing all that. And on that, why I came in, so I came in as a designer, and one of the things that we needed to do is now we have all of these new technologies, but we need to centralize how we design all of our stuff. And we want to make it easier for our developers and designers to push those out. So I was tasked with doing that. How did we do that at first? Well, UI kits, a little segue is UI kits differ from design systems. And traditionally, they're just designed to create your components so that way you can rapidly just create prototypes, push them out, right? They don't have much in there. They may have all your buttons and all your components, but they don't really have as much design and documentation. They don't centralize all that information. So this was kind of what was originally just going to be step one. And for most shops, this is good enough, especially for smaller stuff. Your designers may just need to pull in as much content as they can, centralize that information so that way someone like me can just build prototype after prototype, send it off, even to your own developers. But quickly, you may need to centralize all of your information. So not just your components, but you may need to actually scale up. And now you want to put your whole infrastructure in one place and start to really build a full system. So the key differences between this design system and the UI kit is once you scale to that point, you're putting more things than just components. You have your typography, your colors, your accessibility. This documentation for a design system is not meant for just developers or designers anymore. You bring in your project managers, you bring in your developers. So it's a system that is kind of the rule, it's the czar of how your shop is going to build things from now on. I emphasize on the very bottom point. I realize now that the color for pink isn't the super greatest to read, so apology on the accessibility. Failed on that one. But the last one on there, the bullet point, is constant contributing and live documentation. What that means is everyone should contribute to that. It's not just the designers. Developers are going to be handed these specs, and they're going to need to say, hey, this button might not work in whatever framework we're using. It'll also be our project managers. They may go, that we need to elaborate a little bit more on X, Y, Z. So this is not something you set and forget. This is something that evolves and builds with your shop. And this is the single source of truth, so it's really important that everyone feels comfortable enough to be able to contribute to it. Some of the hurdles that you're going to overcome, and again, these are more specific to Figma, but they definitely relate to other things or other design software. But these are the big three that we quickly discovered when we started to scale from our simple UI kit into a full design system. The first one is going to be our documentation layout. So one of the things that you'll see a lot in Figma is a lot of people just centralize and put everything all on one big page. And a lot of designers, they're okay with that. But the problem with that is that you don't have any layout. So when you start to pull in your documentation, for example, we use the atomic design. And whenever you start to put in verbiage related to that, people may not understand what an atom is, or a molecule, or an organism. So you kind of have to define that somewhere. Well, if you just keep putting everything all on one page, it kind of gets really like fragmented and really difficult. So the first thing we had to do is almost build components within our components. And these things, they're literally just templates, and we're used to using them here. I have a template right here in PowerPoint. We use them in Word, we use them in emails. So building your own, unfortunately, Figma doesn't, it's kind of a blank canvas. You can download them, the community's great. But that was the first one. We wanted to create our own internal one, so that way all documentation is centralized, looks the same, easy to read, and flows very quickly.
Is it still working here?
All right, we're back. Figma does not do a great job. Just going to reemphasize on that because it doesn't. It's terrible. Hope you're listening, Adobe. But one of the things that we had to do was break things up, and developers are used to doing that. We modularize all our code. Designers, I'm one of them, so I'm gonna say it. But we're like, it's final. Oh, it's final. It's final version 2. It's final.old.version 2, and so getting out of that mindset was very difficult for me specifically. So I had to create a way to do that, and you'll see that here in a second when we go inside Figma. And the last one, unfortunately, is the biggest issue. We had to offset this onto the human element, but it's version control. Most design systems don't take into version control. But I said earlier that OMES helps dozens, but it's really hundreds of agencies. So internally, this may not be as big of an issue, but it is one of the biggest requests inside the Figma community to fix, because versioning inside this design system is difficult. For example, imagine if I have 5 prototypes that I've sent out to 5 people. 4 of them are locked because they're going to do presentations, they're going to talk to the higher ups, or they just want to say, this is what we're going to get in 2 to 3 months. And then the last one is still in development. Someone like me is working on it, they haven't really finalized what they're going to do with it. Well, if I update the design system and they push it to their prototypes, that could potentially change it. So now a person who's prepping for this meeting the next day, now it looks completely different and they don't know why. So for me, that was a huge ordeal. It wasn't just a 1 or 2 prototype. We've shared out dozens and dozens of them. So that ripple effect for versioning was very difficult to overcome. And unfortunately, I only have a Band-Aid. I don't have a permanent fix. Again, we offloaded it to the human element, and I'll describe that here in a second. So we're going to jump into a demo. This is all Figma based. I'm hoping it will transition over. Let's see. Oh, cool. It's a much bigger screen. Okay, so I'm kind of going to go backwards and kind of out of order based on those 3 topics that we had. First, the layout that we have on here. I wanted, again, I built this concept of putting centralized documentation in here. So this atomic design has nothing to do with design system. This is just a piece of documentation to help explain it. So the layout that you see here was one of the first things we had to build. So this was our documentation layout. Everything that is inside our design system uses this layout. And this helps every user know that they can go in here, they're going to have a description, they're going to have their components, and in the top right, I added a link, and that's where the documentation can go if it's external. We have internal documentation, but your organizations may have something inside Atlassian, a simple wiki, a README file, a repo, who knows what, if you're using Storybook. But that's where they can go to read further into this. So again, this is what I was talking about from a layout standpoint, but also bringing in documentation that's external and putting it inside yours to describe what this is. So if you're not a designer, you may not know what atomic design is. This is kind of like the boilerplate of what it could be. Over here on the left, I will say it again, file structure was terrible, so you just have pages that kind of stream in there. So the first thing we did was we broke things out based off of components, and then even more so, we based them based off of the atomic design. So we have atoms, where's my mouse? Atoms, molecules, organisms, and we even went so far as to start building out our full-on templates. That way people could see full-page design. The little arrows that you see there and the line that you see here, this line is actually just a page. It has nothing on it. We just created an empty one so I can create a line across the top. Yes? Man, you know, that's why I wanted to use this laptop. I think I can. Ooh, where's my DPI button? How to computer? No. Let's see if I can. I don't think I can. On my slides, I have this on there. I can actually blow it up on that one so I can post that inside their Slack channel. So, one of the things that for the file structure is breaking those things out. We're just going to click one. We're just going to click buttons. We have the same sort of template that we have on there. We have our basic documentation, and we have our components. And we follow that flow through everything. The folder structure that you see over here on the left is, again, from a programmer standpoint, may feel like class explosion, because some of these are pretty small, and we may not need to really know that much. And granted, we only have a few button variants. Some people will have thousands of button variants if you have a lot of different colors. One of those things that you have whenever you have class explosion, when a lot of little things like this are brought out to multiple pages, does seem a little excessive. But when you start to get into bigger things like our cards, where we need to have more descript components, and we want to break them out into individual sections and then show their different variants and their different states, this system really helps. We have over here on the right, we even start to have, those are prototypes and areas where people can go in there and view them, and I call those complex components, but those are able to send a prototype to someone and they can interact with them. Again, a whole point of this is trying to scale the documentation, not from a single UI concept, but to be able to say, hey, now we're going to have a lot of different prototypes, a lot of people in the kitchen, and we want to make sure that it's not disorganized and everyone can work on it in a uniform way. I'm running out of time. This is a huge design system, but the last thing I want to mention was version control. One of the human elements that we had was we were not able to solve, it's loading, we're not able to solve that internally. They had a beta, but then Adobe bought Figma, and the beta disappeared, so there's no real versioning system. So what we decided to do was everything when you create any sort of file, we organize ours based on project, but every file has a thumbnail for the very first thing. And each thumbnail has a little button that's up on the top right, and that tells its state. We just use the standard red, yellow, green. If it's red, that means that the users have it. Do not touch it. Don't update it, right? Do not, just a universal rule, do not push out any changes unless you get the green and you get the go-ahead. The yellow means that the users have it, but you're okay to push it. Just be careful with what you push. If they're full-on changes, you may need to communicate with them. And then our green is simple. You're good to go. It's internal. We haven't shared it with anyone, so feel free to do whatever it is you want because there's no external eyes on it. So the versioning control, again, we offloaded it. That's a real big issue that we had, but it's really important to consider that. One of the biggest design systems that I read was they actually would copy their entire design systems and they would version it. So in this, we call our scissor tail V1, V2, V3, V4. And anyone who was on V1 wouldn't need to get any of the changes. And then when they wanted to bump the person from one version to another, they would just send them a new prototype. Again, that solves the issue, but that does not scale well, especially with the system that's this large. So I am open for suggestions. If anyone has a better way for version control inside the design system, please let me know, because that has been eating away at me, and I have to be the one to maintain this, so any help is great. I know I'm well over my 15 or 10 minutes, but if you guys have any questions, I'll take them, but if not, normally I would say go to the OKC WebDevs Slack channel, but this is more design related, so I've already created a thread, so if you have any questions, either on Slack or here, feel free to join the design Slack channel, and those designers are great, or post it in mine, and I'll answer any questions I have. Thank you.